They will try to take four things from you across your life: your land, your children, your body, and your name. You will only get some of them back. No single woman's life can hold 5 centuries of Native history, so this isn't one woman's story. It's the story of generations of women who lived through it, and you are all of them, one after another. You are born into the Lakota Nation on the northern plains, before the worst of it reaches you. Your grandmother names you after something she saw in a dream the night you were born, and that name is yours alone. No one else in the band carries it while you're alive. You learn to tan a hide before you learn to read anything, because no one here reads. You learn the winter count, the pictures your family paints on hide each year to remember what happened: a hard freeze, a good hunt, a death. You learn which plants stop bleeding and which ones start labor. Your mother teaches you these things the same way her mother taught her, hands over hands, without hurry. Your family follows the buffalo. The animal isn't just meat to you, it's your lodge covering, your rope, your tools, your winter coat. You watch the men bring one down, and you watch the women turn it into 40 different things before the sun sets. Nothing is wasted. You are taught that waste is its own kind of dishonesty. You are 12 when a trader passes through with goods from the East iron pots, cloth, glass beads, and something else riding along in his blankets that nobody can see yet. The sickness moves faster than anyone can outrun it, faster than the horses, faster than the news of it. Entire lodges go quiet within a week. You watch your uncle's family disappear one at a time, the strongest ones going as fast as the smallest. Your own face carries the marks after you survive it, pitted skin across your cheeks that never fully smooths out. You are one of the ones who lives. You don't understand yet why some live and some don't. No one does. The band is smaller by the next winter count. Whole lodges are simply gone, and no one paints a single picture that can hold what that actually means. You help bury more people before you turn 15 than most people bury in a lifetime. You marry young, the way girls do here, to a man from a neighboring band who lost his first wife the same season you lost your uncle's family. Grief marries grief. You build a life out of what's left. Then the treaties start arriving, one after another, each one taking a little more of the land the buffalo need to survive, and you don't yet understand that the buffalo's death and your own are tied to the same rope. You are Cherokee now, a different nation entirely, a different life, because this story moves between women the way grief moves between families, and the removal that breaks you belongs to the Cherokee. Forced at gunpoint from the mountains of Georgia toward a territory none of you have ever seen. Soldiers give your family days, not weeks, to leave a house your grandfather built. You carry your infant daughter wrapped against your chest for the entire walk west, because there is no wagon room left for a baby who can still be carried. You walk through winter mud in shoes that fall apart by the second week. You watch an elder who taught you your clan stories die on the road and get buried in a shallow grave with no marker, because there's no time to dig deeper and no stone to carve. Nearly a quarter of everyone who starts this walk with you does not finish it. Your daughter survives. That is the only ledger you're keeping by the time you reach the new territory, not what you lost, just who is still breathing beside you. You rebuild a house from nothing in a place that isn't home, and you raise your daughter to remember Georgia through your voice alone, because she will never see it herself. The last of the old way, Lakota Reservation, 1880s. You're an old woman now, back among Lakota people once more, watching a way of life end in real time. The buffalo herds that fed and clothed and sheltered your whole nation are gone within a single decade, hunted to almost nothing on purpose, by outsiders who understood exactly what killing the herds would do to people like you. You are confined now to a reservation, a fraction of the size of the land your family once followed freely. Government rations arrive late and rotten more often than they arrive on time. You watch children go hungry in a winter when your grandmother's generation would have had a full smokehouse. An agent comes through counting heads, assigning family plots, telling you land held in common by your whole nation will now be split into individual parcels, a system designed, though no one says it plainly, to break apart what's left of the nation's control over its own territory. You bury your husband that same winter. You have exactly one thing left that no ration card and no agent's ledger can take from you: your grandchildren, and what you can still teach them before someone else decides to teach them instead. The Taken Child, Carlisle-style boarding school, 1890s. You are 7 years old when the agent tells your mother that sending you away is not a request. Government policy across dozens of tribal nations at this time removes children from their families by the thousands and sends them to schools built specifically to erase what makes them who they are. The founder of one of the largest calls the mission itself killing the Indian to save the man, and says so publicly, proudly. They cut your hair the first day. In your family, long hair carries, meaning grief is marked by cutting it short. So watching it fall to the floor here feels like watching yourself get mourned by strangers who don't know what they're doing to you. You are given an English name because your own name doesn't fit their roles. You are punished for speaking your own language, even to another homesick child from your own nation standing 3 feet away. You learn to whisper it anyway, late at night, so you don't forget the sound of your own name in your own mouth. Sickness moves through the dormitories the way it moved through the plains a century before measles, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and children die here too, buried in school cemeteries far from their families, who are sometimes told only after the ground has already closed over the grave. You survive years of this. You go home changed, speaking accented in your first language now, caught permanently between two worlds that were never supposed to require choosing. You are 26, married, the mother of 2 children already, standing in an Indian health service clinic for what you believe is a routine visit after your second delivery. A doctor mentions a tubal ligation in passing, tells you it's simply the responsible thing to do, hands you a consent form written in language dense enough that a rushed, frightened new mother could easily miss what it actually authorizes. You don't fully understand, in that exam room, what you're agreeing to. Across the country in this same decade, thousands of Native women go through some version of this same room, the same rushed form, the same doctor who never quite explains what permanent means until it's already done. You find out only later, at a follow-up appointment years after, when you and your husband are trying for a 3rd child and nothing happens, that there will be no 3rd child, not because your body failed you, but because a decision was made for you in a room where you were supposed to be the one deciding. You don't tell your daughters for a long time. When you finally do, they are the ones who cry first, not you. You ran out of tears for this particular loss years before you found the words to explain it. The government changed, the uniforms changed, the weapons changed. But for some Native families, the fear of losing a woman never actually went away. It just stopped wearing a soldier's uniform. The name on the poster? Present day. Your granddaughter is 24 now, living 2 states away for a job. And she calls you every Sunday like clockwork, until one Sunday the phone doesn't ring. You call the number that always answers, and it rings out into nothing. You call again the next day. By the 3rd day, you're driving to the tribal police station yourself, and you learn what thousands of Native families already know before it happens to them. Cases like hers move slower through the system than they would for almost anyone else. Jurisdiction tangled between tribal, state, and federal authority in a way that can leave a missing woman's case sitting unopened for weeks, while everyone argues about whose desk it belongs on. You make the poster yourself at a copy shop, her senior photo enlarged and grainy, a phone number at the bottom that's yours, not a detective's. You staple it to a gas station bulletin board next to a lost dog flyer. And something about that particular indignity, your granddaughter's face sharing space with somebody's missing beagle, breaks something in you that the clinic all those years ago never fully managed to break. You never stop looking. Some families get answers, some never do. You don't yet know which kind of family you're going to be. And some mornings, that not knowing is worse than grief would be. The one who stayed. You are old now, sitting on a porch on land that is, after everything, still tribal land, smaller than it should be, but still yours, still held, still here. A great-granddaughter runs up the steps speaking a handful of words in a language that was nearly beaten out of her great-great-grandmother's generation entirely. Words she's learning in a language immersion class. The tribe funds itself now, on its own terms, taught by people who refused to let the last fluent speakers take it all with them when they died. You think about the girl on the plains before the sickness came, and the girl on the road out of Georgia, and the girl whose hair fell to a schoolroom floor, and the woman in the clinic who didn't get to choose. and the grandmother who made a poster at a copy shop because no one else would. You are all of them somehow sitting on this porch at once. The cycle continues. The danger has never fully stopped, and neither has the survival. Somewhere tonight, another family is making a poster nobody should have to make. Somewhere tonight, another child is learning a word in a language someone tried, generations ago, to erase completely, and is saying it out loud anyway.